All right, thanks for joining in for another episode. We finally have a woman on. I have a few women that think somewhat highly of me. Not Heather, she doesn't like me. But for any of you men who are listening to this on the audio through Spotify or Amazon or Apple, and I understand why you are, these skinny white jeans and everything, you're probably going to want to get on my YouTube channel now and see why. We have the gorgeous Heather Torriente with us today. So
very generous, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not generous. I'm kind. I'm honest.
There you go.
So a little bit about Heather and I. You know, when did we meet?
3 years ago.
About 3 years ago. So,
yeah.
You know, we I think I messed with Heather's friend more, Christiane. So, you know, Heather and I became pretty good friends and have stayed good friends for a long time, and have both seen you know, us go through different things. Well, a few things. Well, I'll talk more about some of my interactions with Heather and what she's meant to be a little bit later. But you know, let's start with you, Heather.
Okay.
You want to talk a little bit about your upbringing in your life?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in a really small town, Preston, Idaho. Have you ever seen Napoleon Dynamite?
It's a wonderful movie.
That's where I was born and bred, right there. So I had amazing, wonderful, loving parents, but we definitely had our struggles growing up. I grew up in a house where my father was an alcoholic. He's the most amazing man. Anyone who's ever met him will say he's the most amazing man, the greatest friend, and he loves people. But he was an alcoholic growing up, and so my father was an alcoholic. My mom, she was an active member of the LDS Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, for most of my childhood. I think when I was very, very young, she wasn't, but then she went back to the church. And my sister, I have an older sister, she probably starting from junior high, she became a drug addict. And then I have a younger brother who also probably about that same age also started in with drugs. So that was kind of my growing up environment. I always felt incredibly loved and everything, but I definitely in my home, I took the position of the peacemaker. I think my older sister was getting into so much trouble, my younger brother was too, and for me, I think the way that I found my place was to be very kind, to not cause any ripples, and I definitely didn't bring up anything that might cause strong emotions, whether it be good, bad, emotional, anything like that. I just felt like, okay, I want to make sure when I'm here, everybody's happy. And so, yeah, that's what I tried to do. I did well in school. I made good choices. I was a good kid. In fact, one time I had to ask my mom, I said, Mom, I feel like I was such a good kid that I was respectful and I didn't talk back. And is that true? Did I make that up? And she said, no.
She talks back now.
No, not true. And she said, no, you really were. And so I tried to be a really good, kind, peaceful entity in my home.
So, you know, and if you've watched my stuff, I'm in long-term recovery from drug addiction and certainly understand that. So we have Dad who has the best heart in the world. Mm-hmm. Every addict I know has that, right? But is struggling with some issues, and it created a situation where you saw both of your siblings suffer.
Yeah.
And so at a young age you felt like it was your responsibility to ensure everyone's happiness.
Yeah, and also I felt like I didn't have a right to suffer. Okay. You know, like that everyone else was struggling in whatever ways, and so I would just be happy. I was just, and I'm naturally happy. I'm very positive. I'm very optimistic, but Yeah.
So at such a young age, with all that focus on dad's struggles and your siblings and probably trying to, you know, help mom, did it cause some of your personal life to suffer as you put so much effort into everyone else's stuff?
Well, yeah. In fact, it's interesting because when I first graduated from high school, I left and went to college, and my parents had gotten divorced about that time. And it was so interesting because whenever I would come home, I would get sick, like sick to my stomach. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I realized later, like, that I hadn't dealt with any of these things. And so that was one thing. Physically, it actually affected me. I think the other thing, too, is I didn't have a real example as far as, like, what does a healthy relationship look like? How am I a healthy partner? How do I find a healthy partner? I didn't know any of those things. I just thought, oh, I'm just going to make good choices. And if I see someone else making good choices, like, it's going to be easy.
Okay. Well, speaking of a partner,
Yeah.
you want to fast forward a little bit and talk about your marriage?
Sure. Yeah, I got married when I was 21. A lot of my friends were already married, and I was like, I will not get married before I'm 21.
For you that are not from Utah, that's very normal. I was 25, and I'm like, I'm the old weird guy at the parties.
Yeah.
I got to get married.
Yeah, most of my friends were married, and I was like, but I'm not getting married before I'm 21.
Now I'm still the old weird guy at the parties that's not married, so nothing's changed.
So I turned 21 in July, and I got married in October, so I made it to 21.
Okay.
And
that's a long courtship by our LDS standards.
Right.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, no, the courtship was a little longer than that. Not much, but no, I actually met my husband before he served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We met at college, and he went on his mission. And I lived my life, I tried to live my life a very particular way because I wanted a different life than what I saw my parents live. And like I say, I love my family, I love my siblings, I have wonderful, wonderful memories, but I did want a different life, and I wanted a different relationship with my spouse. And so I tried really hard to live a certain way that I thought, okay, this will ensure a, you know, healthy and a happy marriage. And so yeah, we got married at 21, and we were both going to school, we were both working, we were both busy, then started having kids. And probably, I'm trying to think the timeline. When I had him when I was 24. And when he was still very young, I found out that some things had happened in my marriage that I was unaware of that caused me some very severe betrayal trauma. I did not have any idea how to deal with this. I had no coping skills, and beyond that, I was also completely surprised. I had no idea. I thought our marriage was wonderful. I was so happy. In fact, I remember looking around at other people thinking, oh, like, we have a really great relationship, and you know, we're doing this really well. And so I had no idea. And for anyone who's suffered any kind of betrayal trauma, you probably can feel a little twinge of what that feels like. But I just remember I went into the bathroom and I just sobbed on my probably not very clean toilet. I didn't even care. My face was just in it. And I sobbed and I sobbed and I sobbed and I sobbed. And I don't know how long I was in there. And finally, I just lost all of my energy and I just fell to the floor. And I couldn't get off the floor. And then my husband, at the time, you know, who had just, you know, elicited this reaction from me, I had to allow him to kind of pick me off the floor and take me back. And so that was completely shocking and heartbreaking on a level that I had never understood before.
Yeah. Well, obviously it affects me. So, so eventually you get divorced, obviously. So how long were you married?
So we were actually married just a couple months shy of 20 years. So we were married 19 years. So that was pretty early on in our marriage. After that, we actually moved. We moved away. We moved overseas. We lived overseas for about 10 years. And throughout that time, there were other moments of the same thing, this same betrayal trauma that kind of came back. And it's really interesting because I've had a lot of people over the years say things like, oh, you know, if this ever happened to me, or if this ever happened to me, like, that's it, like, I would be gone. And it was so interesting, and I probably thought that before I got married as well. But I found myself in a very different position when it was actually me. You know, I had married the love of my life, the one I wanted to be with forever. We had our children together. And I do think too, as I just felt like, okay, I am a good forgiver. I can forgive this, and we can be happy. And the thing that I always thought was, okay, what can I do? What can I do? It was always like, what can I do? What can I do? Okay. Which at the time I really thought was, and it's not a bad thing, but I kind of took all of that upon myself and just thought, okay, if I do enough, and if I do this, and if I do this, and if I change in this one, and I do this, and I do this, like, I can save us. Mm-hmm. And it took me a long time before I realized that by myself I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, you know, pain and this level of pain, and, you know, we can look at, you know, during her father's struggles, I think there probably definitely was some abandonment that Heather experienced.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
And then obviously there was some severe betrayal. You know, I've studied psychology long enough and been taught by, I've talked about my therapist, who's just phenomenal, that if I talk to someone for 5-10 minutes, I usually have a pretty accurate idea of the specific trauma, because it's usually very predictable. Well, in these two things, one thing that typically will happen with people is they get terrified that everyone's going to abandon them and everyone's going to betray them, and they can develop all sorts of mechanisms that the brain does to try and protect them. One of them is known as avoidant attachment, and I'll talk about that later on. But basically, you know, it's a issue with people, and a lot of it can stem from when you're young as well, at a young age. But when you start to feel real intimacy, or you start to feel someone who you like, the more they like you, the more that triggers trauma within you, and you never really let anyone in. And you want to let them in, but because you haven't processed, you haven't went through the betrayal, you haven't went through the abandonment, you know, you're still viewing those things in the scope of the young little Heather who had her father as an alcoholic, or the Heather that was right in the trauma of there. Yeah. If you see my story, you know, mine, for you guys, if you've never seen any other episodes, is in episode 2 through 4. Pain hardened me for a long time. Just hardened me. And, you know, I was a victim, and my coping mechanisms were not great, you know, and I can give myself some slack, because in the end, they were the best that I knew how. And I really wasn't trying to hurt anyone, but my pain eventually has ended up softening me to a degree that I don't like sometimes. I always tell Heather I'm a tough guy, and she disputes it.
And I tell him, what do I tell you you should do more?
Smile.
Yeah.
I don't want to smile. Smile more.
Smile more.
My daughter says the same thing. She's like, Dad, you look like you want to kill people. I'm thinking. So, you know, Jesus has made me nice, and like, he has a way of doing that if you turn to him. But Heather's also made me nice.
Aw,
And I've resisted it like crazy, but she's let me know what she likes, the sweet cake. So
Yes.
I like the sour patch, sour first.
Sweet and
First
sour.
I'm sour first, and then I'm
That's
sweet.
Mm-hmm.
So, but she's helped bring that out in me. But I digress a little bit. But Heather shows no signs of avoidance. Heather is a girl that when she gets into a relationship, she's put her heart into every single one of them. And, you know, obviously they haven't all worked out the way she would have hoped, or Heather wouldn't be here single, but she'd be telling us all how to find our spouse. But she's processed her trauma, right? Mm-hmm. She's processed that abandonment. That codependency that we've talked about, and Heather kind of describes it, you know, codependency in episode, I believe, 8, I talk about codependency, but it's the chronic neglect of self. And keep in mind, it's the chronic, right? It's you're chronically neglecting yourself in order to gain love, validation, and respect from another person. Well, being raised with an alcoholic father or being abandoned, or these things create severe codependency. And what Heather described at an early age was codependency, right? Like, it's my job to keep everyone happy.
Yeah.
And so normally in this situation, without a lot of work, Heather would still be codependent today, meaning she would place others' happiness above hers. She would gravitate to relationships where the person was struggling a lot more, and she would spend all her time trying to heal that person. And that would feel good to Heather because Heather couldn't have any time to think about herself. So just like an addiction, it would be numbing, but because Heather's whole focus would be on who she's dating, her family life, her children, her work would all suffer. Hence the addiction with codependency. Well, I understand this stuff very well, and Heather really shows no signs of either.
You know, what's interesting about that too is when all the whole codependency kind of started coming out, people were trying to understand what that was. It was so interesting because I thought, I'm not codependent. I'm strong. I'm independent. I'm, you know, I don't have low self-esteem. I like all of these things, and then I realized that's not what that is.
Right.
But for me too, like a lot of that healing for me came because one, I went to a lot of counseling, which was very, very helpful to me. I didn't know the tools that I didn't have. I think counseling is such a fantastic idea, and I think there's a lot of people that think like, oh, I don't need that. And even like, you know, God-fearing people who are like, nope, I just need God and He will heal me. And trust me, I believe in that, and I believe in the atonement of Jesus Christ with all of my heart. But I also believe that He gives us these people that can help us. And I didn't know how to help myself. I was praying, I was asking for help, but so with that, along with counseling, I went to a lot of counseling, and I really had to have some really good hard looks at myself. In fact, when I went to one of my counselors, I went there, and this was later in our marriage, when we were separated for about 9 months, and I was like 95% sure that I was done. I was not doing this again. And I went to my counselor and I said, hey, I am not here to save my marriage. I am here because I want to feel strong again. I want to believe in myself again. I want to trust myself again. And I don't want to be bitter. I don't want to be angry. I want to love my life no matter where I'm at. That's what I want. And she just looked at me and went, okay, yes, let's do that.
Someone who actually wants to get better.
Yes, and so I did
refreshing.
I did have to take some good hard looks too, because even though I may not have been doing certain things in my marriage, I still had to own my part, and I definitely had a part in that. And so that was super healing for me.
So you talk about therapy.
Yeah.
You hit on God.
Mm-hmm.
How does that play into your...
Everything. It's really interesting. I see so many people and hear a lot of stories, and people who go through trauma, I think there's some really distinct different paths that a lot of people take. And some people, when they go through hard trauma like this, or other things too. We've all been through trauma. Nobody lives this life trauma-free. Nobody does. But I feel like some people really go away from God. Maybe they blame him. Maybe they decide they don't believe in him or whatever.
Did that for a long time.
Yeah. And some people turn to God. And for me, I turned toward God. And I often think about that as why. Because I know so many wonderful, amazing people that, turned away. And maybe they turned back and maybe they didn't, But I often think about why did I choose that? And I think so much of my childhood experiences played into that, because I kind of was able to look and see, oh, that doesn't serve me if I choose this. That doesn't serve me if I choose this. And when I went to God, I just felt peace. It wasn't always the easy way, but I loved the peace, and that's what I wanted. So I think those early experiences really helped me on that path. And I'd seen enough examples and stuff in my life of how going the other way didn't serve, and oftentimes took them to a very much harder place.
Well, what role did his son play in your healing?
Everything. When you go through something that's so traumatic, I would like to think that I'm strong enough and I'm brave enough and I'm capable enough on my own that I can forgive something that big, and that I can find love through something like that. But the truth is I couldn't. And I had so many nights just praying, sobbing, begging for the peace that I knew I needed, that would only come if I could forgive, and in a real way. And that was the only way that I was able to do it, because of the atonement of Jesus Christ. I am not big enough and strong enough and capable enough to do something that massive on my own, but with him, yeah.
How does that feel? How did that feel, Heather, when you were able to forgive this stuff?
It was everything. It was like a big exhale, It was a weight off of my shoulder. And honestly, it was a peace and a love and a happiness that I wouldn't have known without it. When you're carrying around that inside and you don't let that go, it affects everything about you. It affects your outlook on life. It affects how you treat other people. It affects how you think about yourself. It affects your health. It affects all of those things.
Drinking poison and expecting it to kill someone else?
Yeah.
I've done a lot of that.
Yeah. And I knew I did not want that. And like I said, I am positive by nature, but it meant so much to me, like so much to me, that I was not going to live my life sad or bitter or angry, because life is too short for that.
Or a victim.
Or a victim. Nope, absolutely not. Yeah.
So, on in terms of forgiveness, Heather, how have you been able to still forgive yet set healthy boundaries that have kept you in a safe situation with people?
Okay, that's a good question. So I'm going to start with one story, and if I get distracted, bring me back.
Sometimes she gets distracted.
I do get distracted. It's true.
Go ahead.
The short answer is love. I'm going to say that for me, that was super helpful. When I was getting divorced, it was right at the end. I can say that I did not love my ex-husband. He was my husband at the time. And for some reason, not for some reason, I think I know where it came from. I think Heavenly Father was letting me know this would be important to me. But for some reason, I just kept feeling I cannot leave this marriage unless I do it from a place of love, and if I can love him. And that sounds like an odd thing, I think, maybe to a lot of people in that situation. And but I remember praying so much and going to the temple and just saying, Heavenly Father, I need you to help me love him. I need you to help me love him, because I can't leave if it's from a place of sadness and resentment and anger. I need to know that I have done everything I can and that I can move forward with a perfect peace, and that I won't ever look back and think, I responded in a way that was not genuine to who I am. And I didn't also want to be that example to my kids. And I wanted that rock out of my heart. I wanted that out. So it was very important to me. And that's another just testament of the power of the atonement. Because I can honestly say that before we got divorced, I loved him. Not in a way that our marriage was going to work, because it didn't change some of the circumstances, right? And I couldn't pray away his agency as much as sometimes I wanted to. That was a huge lesson that I learned. You cannot pray away someone's agency, even if it's for a good purpose. You can't do it. You can't do it. And to do it is very selfish in and of itself, right? And that would mean that someone else could try and pray away mine. And I don't want that. But I was able to leave that from an absolute place of love. And because of that, I am not kidding you, Cade, through the entire process of getting divorced, I had peace. I just had peace.
That's beautiful. That's the peace that only the Prince of Peace, Jesus Christ, offers. Mm-hmm. You know, and I've talked about this thing, and Heather and I's stories. Obviously, the center of it is Jesus Christ, and you know, we're sharing our truth. And mm-hmm. again, the object here is not to tell you to heal exactly how we've healed, right? I talk about many alternative ways to heal, and I think there are all different sorts that could be used in conjunction. And you know, our way may not work for your way, but I think Heather feels the same. You know, we're going to own our truth, and if we do not share the single biggest tool that we believe will help mankind, mm-hmm. which is the Lord Jesus Christ, we'd be doing you a great disservice. So I love how you illustrated, you know, when we forgive, right, that there's a tendency to think part of forgiveness is letting people that are exhibiting toxic behaviors back in close to us, right? Yep. And understanding that, you know, trust is interesting. You can't make yourself trust someone. You just can't, right? You can forgive someone and be like, man, I want to trust you, but it's a subconscious thing that happens, and it only happens through consistent behavior over an extended period of time, mm-hmm. especially if you've been betrayed. If someone consistently shows this behavior and time runs its course, eventually we will start to trust them again. But part of loving them and part forgiving is, you know, forgiving the action, but still protecting ourselves, and whatever that needs to be, where that person is in our life, is actually being kind to them, yeah. right?
And yourself.
Yeah. If someone's exhibiting such toxic behavior in your life that's causing you to maybe even sever ties or not talk to them, chances are they're probably exhibiting that behavior with most relationships. Mm-hmm. And that's where it gets hard with boundaries. But by putting those boundaries in place, and yep. by, you know, doing the divorce and doing that, it's a way of saying, hey, you know, this probably is not going to make you the most happy. So yep. It's a hard lesson to learn, but
yeah, hard lesson to learn. In fact, it's interesting, like at the very end, right before I got divorced, my family's always been so supportive. They are the best. No matter what happened between my husband and I, wherever we were, they were like, Heather, where are you? Because whatever you do, we're going to love and accept your decision, and we're not going to treat you different. We won't treat your husband different. Like, what do you need from us? So they were so wonderful, and that was helpful for me too. But an interesting thing was at the very, very end, actually in two different conversations, so it wasn't even the same conversation, I was talking to my mom and I was talking to my sister, and this is probably one of the biggest things that hit me, that really opened my eyes, is I was talking to them, and they said, you know, whatever you want to do here, we will support you. We love you. You know that. And again, these are two different conversations. They almost said exactly the same thing. They said, you know what I've noticed in you is that I don't see your sparkle anymore. That made me the saddest, more than anything else I think they could have said to me. I don't see your sparkle, because I've always been so positive. I've always been able to just bounce back, and I've always been able to be like, okay, yep, we forgive, we're on, and I would just be happy. And so when they said that to me, I just cried, because I'm like, it's true, and I'm not fooling myself anymore. I'm definitely not anybody else. But I couldn't make myself. And they both said, maybe it's been enough. We'll support you whatever you need, but maybe it's been enough. And never, ever have they given me any advice before as far as like, you should stay, you should go. It's just like, what are you going to do? We'll support you. And so that was kind of like a really big eye-opening moment too. Not only just at where I was and that I knew that divorce was where I needed to go, but also that I needed some healing. Like I was in a place that I didn't realize I had gotten to.
Oh, it looks like she got her sparkle back and then some, so obviously she's done something right. Heather is a single mother, you know, and your ex is out of the country, right?
Yep.
And so she's a single mother with 3 kids, 2 of which are out of high school, correct? And
Yeah.
one is.
Yep.
How do you do that?
Well, you know, the truth is I don't really do it alone. And one thing I will say, I do want to say this. I have so much respect for my ex. He is a wonderful man. He really, really is. He adores his kids. They adore him. And I have no bad feelings. None at all. Like none at all. In fact, I really respect that we can co-parent really well. But yeah, he's out of country. And so essentially I've been mostly, you know, have the kids on my own. And it's been a double-edged sword. Part of it is nice because I don't have to think about schedules and every other weekend and that kind of stuff. And we do work really well together. So when he comes back, it's like, oh, you're coming back these days? Okay, you want the kids? Great. Like, yeah, that works for me. And we're able to do that really well. But it also means, for the most part, I'm here with no backup. And that's kind of being single anyways. But I've found my backup in other places, you know. I've had a lot of wards where I've had really good ministering brothers. I've had really good friends. I've had amazing family support. And my family's far away. But sometimes all I need is just, you know, that you can do it. You're doing a great job. And sometimes I feel like, yes, I'm doing a great job. And sometimes I'm like, I fail. I fail at parenting. Today I fell. And then I just try to do better. But it's not easy. But I do feel like Heavenly Father's so generous that if I stay close to him, he finds all of these wonderful ways to help make up the difference. And that's been beautiful to experience.
I've met all 3 of your children and have a pretty close relationship with 2 of them. And I would say you're doing an incredible job. I know Heather's children adore her, and, you know, I can certainly see why. So keep it up.
Thank you.
You know, as I hear her talk, you know, and I'm in a similar situation. You know, in my marriage, I was more the problem, you know, and you know, when I grew up and changed, things got easier. But just like Heather, I see a lot of divorces where people use the kids as collateral damage to, you know, get at each other. And, you know, I'm not here to make a judgment call because I'm not in those situations, but I work with kids and I see the absolute damage that does. And so it's really neat to see where there's been so many issues within marriage, but at some point both parties can just say, hey, you know, my guess is we probably wouldn't talk much if, you know, we didn't have these little people that unite us. At some point we'd probably be good with each other, but they require us to have a relationship the rest of this life. And we're going to put things behind. We're going to swallow our egos and our pride, and we're going to try to unitedly, you know, fill that gap that was created when we separated and raise them in the best way possible.
Yeah, and I think as you're saying that, that was, I really think, one of the reasons why I didn't know it at the time, but why when I felt like I had to leave from a place of love, I think that has helped so much in our being able to really co-parent well. And the kids, I know that our kids really appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, being a single dad of 2 little ones and a 13-year-old girl. Yeah, I can't say anything right. You know, at this point I usually just come in and I talk about my day and my problems, and that sometimes interests her. But Heather has helped me a couple times, and my 13-year-old is she's absolutely wonderful, and she's
They're amazingly intuitive when we listen.
Yeah, too much so.
Yeah.
Like, you're 13, you're not 40. Quit acting. You're smarter than some of the people I know.
And yet they'll say something and you'll be like,
pick up everything.
Yeah.
So, you know, a couple things with Heather and I. You know, I think one time she said, "Cade, when you talk, I don't know if I'm being hugged or punched." And I tried to do more hugging.
Oh, good.
Just a little bit of punching. We were at a thing a while back giving Top Gun names. What was your name?
I missed
her name. Her name was probably the Destroyer.
No.
Yeah, it was something bad.
No, it was not. I was there at the end of that, so I didn't get one.
Well, mine was Trigger.
Yeah.
I tend to have a natural gift of triggering people whether I want to or not. So Heather is special to me. You know, a couple years ago I had this association, and you know, I think the person with which I was involved was for the most part well-intentioned, but I was caught up in a situation where I wasn't able to see exactly what was going on, and I'm not always the easiest person to approach. I do not know how to mask my emotions to save my life. You don't have to be an empath to read me, I promise you. I'll tell you how I feel, but you know, when I go out, I've got what I've been told is the best RBF, male RBF that's ever existed, hence I should smile more. But one night I was struggling, and I'd went over to this Western, this dance place that we were at, and you know what, the risk of probably offending me, and at this point Heather and I weren't nearly as close as we are now, she asked me if she could talk to me, and I won't go too much into the situation because it involves others, but it's what friends do, right? She helped me see what was happening, and it was a big catalyst for me to change and kind of, you know, remove myself from a situation that really, in the end, threatened to destroy about everything I'd built. So, and she's done that a few times, so I appreciate that very much.
Well, that works both ways.
To me, for real friends, they tell you what you need to hear.